Hi, I'm Kaylee, and today I'm going to be covering the unsolved abduction and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott in 1980, Anaheim, California. This case is one that's kind of always creeped me out ever since I heard of it about a year ago. It's just one of those cases that sticks with you. I mean, I love to research true crime and cold cases, but there's always some cases that stick with you more than others, and this is definitely one. I find it very eerie and disturbing. So if you're someone that's kind of freaked out by true crime or these kind of cases, then I'd recommend not listening to this. Alright, so with that in mind, let's get to it. Dorothy Jane Scott was born April 23rd, 1948. When she was abducted, she was 32 years old. Dorothy was a single mother living in Stanton, California with her aunt and her 4-year-old son, Sean. She, by all accounts, was a very loving and devoted mother. She adored her son. Her son was her whole world. Her and Sean's father at the time were split up. I think it was just kind of they realized that they weren't really meant to be together like that. They were just better as friends. And at the time, he was actually living in a different state. There was no bitterness between them, though, from everything I've read. Dorothy was described as being a devout Christian who didn't do drugs or drink, and actually her family described her life as being quite boring. She went to work and went home. She maybe once a month would go out with friends, but that was it. And I don't even think it was that she had to be at home. She just loved being home. Her family says she had always been a homebody, and she wanted to spend all her free time with her son that she could. Dorothy worked at a place called Swingers Psych Shop, and it was actually a place that used to be owned by her father. He had recently sold it to a new owner, but he still would go in there and do a lot of the handiwork and just kind of check up on the place. I think he was like one of those people that was retired, but still kind of wanted to work a little bit, so he would, do little odd jobs there. And his daughter Dorothy continued to work there as a secretary. She was in charge of answering the phones and, like dealing with the packages and all that. And her coworkers all said that she was just a really pleasant person to work with. There was no drama, there was no issue. She was always on time. Just a good person, someone you would like to work with. In the months before her abduction and murder, she had been receiving disturbing phone calls. At first, the unidentified male had professed his love for her, and then soon the calls became him talking about wanting to kill her. Obviously, these calls really disturbed Dorothy. She didn't think it was a prank or she felt like whoever this was really wanted to hurt her. And she didn't know who this could be, but she had told her friends and family she felt like she recognized the voice. She just couldn't put a face to it, or a name to it. Like, she recognized the voice, but she just couldn't figure out who it was. And the calls just kept coming and coming in those months. Her mother actually recalls Dorothy telling her about one time how she'd gotten a call from this man, and he told her to come outside, that he had a present for her, and when she did, there was a dead rose sitting on the windshield of her car. Another time she got a call from the man who told her that when he got her alone, he was going to cut her up into bits so that no one would ever find her. Terrifying. This obviously shook Dorothy to her core. She was horrified. She was terrified. She's a single mother. She has a son to raise and take care of. And, she's going to work every day and getting these calls and going home and getting these calls. And in these calls, this man seems to know everything about her. He's describing what she's wearing. He's describing what she's doing. But when she looks out her window, she doesn't see anything. It's very disturbing and creepy. And definitely stalking behavior. So at this point, Dorothy was so scared that she was considering purchasing a handgun, something that she had never owned before. She wasn't really like one of those people that was super into guns. I don't think she'd really been raised in a household that had guns either, but that's how scared she was for her life. She ultimately decided not to purchase the gun, mainly because of her son. She did not want him to accidentally get in the gun case and, something bad happen. So a week before her abduction, she had started taking karate classes instead, and that was basically for self-defense, in case she was very scared. Alright, so now we're getting up to the day of her disappearance, and this is the most crucial day because this is where everything that happens. So the day was, it was at 9 p.m. on May 28th, 1980. She was at a work meeting. So it was just kind of, like a work meeting where you have everyone to get together and just kind of discuss, you know, I don't know, I guess discuss what's going on, all that. Just a regular work meeting. And she looked over and she noticed that one of her coworkers named Conrad Bostrom, he had like a red mark and it was getting worse and it was swollen and just kind of horrible to look at. And she noticed he was sweating profusely and just did not look good. And so basically she was like, hey, do you want me to take you to the ER? You don't look good. And he agreed. He was concerned about himself too. And so they started to head off, and Pam had another coworker decided to come with them. So on their way to the hospital, she decided to stop at her parents' house and just inform them where she was going because they had Sean. And also while there, she decided to change out of her black scarf into a red one. And then they were on their way. They went to the hospital, and once they got there, it was determined that he had been bitten by a black widow spider, which is pretty serious. If not treated, I'm pretty sure it can kill you. So that kind of explained what was wrong with him. So he went in the back and got treated, and Dorothy and Pam were just sitting in the waiting room talking. And when police later asked, Pam said that they didn't really talk about anything significant. They definitely didn't talk about any stalking. I don't think Pam even knew that was going on in her life. They just kind of talked about their daily lives and what was going on. She said Dorothy seemed in a happy mood. She was excited to go home to her son. And around 11 p.m., Conrad came back and he'd been discharged and given a prescription. He also, I guess there was like a pharmacy there where he could fill the prescription. So they started to head over there, and Dorothy offered to just bring her car up to the exit, so once they're done, they could come out there and just head home. She didn't want him to have to walk too far. And so they all agreed to that, and that was the plan. So Dorothy headed out to the parking lot, and they headed to go fill out the prescription. So suddenly, a few minutes go by, and they go out there, and they're waiting for Dorothy, and Dorothy's nowhere to be found. And like I said, they were expecting her car to already be there and just get in and head out. So they're kind of annoyed, honestly. It's late, it's dark, they've been there for hours, they're tired, they want to go home. And all of a sudden, they see her white Toyota come flying past them with the headlights on, so bright that they couldn't even see who was driving, and just goes past them. At first, I think they kind of thought it was a joke, or they thought maybe she had like an emergency with her son. But very soon after, when she's not coming back, they're like starting to get annoyed and kind of pissed off. It's late. Like I said, it's late. They want to go home. It's dark. It's cold. But then a few more minutes go by, and that anger turns into fear. They're like, because they didn't necessarily see her in the car because the headlights were so bright. So they don't really know who was driving the car and if she's okay. So they decide to walk back in the hospital and just give a call to her parents and basically say like, hey, is Dorothy with you? And when the parents tell them no, that's when kind of everyone starts to get alarmed. Dorothy's parents immediately felt something was wrong because they know Dorothy would not have just abandoned them in the parking lot like that, and she definitely wouldn't abandon her son. So it didn't say how Conrad and Pam got a ride home, but I'm guessing somehow they did because they went home. And a few hours pass, and Dorothy's parents still haven't heard from her. She still hasn't come home, so they decide to file a missing persons report. At the time, I don't think the police really took it seriously. They kind of thought, okay, here's this woman who probably just ran away. And obviously her parents were insistent that that's not the case. She would not have run away. She would not have abandoned her son. That's not the kind of person she was. But eventually, the next day, they would take it seriously because at 4:30 a.m. on May 29th, her white 1973 Toyota station wagon was found burning in an alley about 10 miles from the hospital. And this is when police started to think, okay, there's something definitely wrong here. This is foul play. When they got to the car, neither she or her supposed kidnapper were anywhere nearby. So police at this point were definitely investigating it as an abduction and possible homicide. Meanwhile, her parents are just heartbroken, very sad. And about a week after her disappearance, her parents started receiving phone calls from an unidentified man who would just say, "I've got her," and hang up. He would call almost every Wednesday afternoon, according to Vera, Dorothy's mom. He wouldn't say much, just talking about Dorothy and, how he killed her and just horrible things. He would never stay on the phone very long. It's like he knew not to stay on too long because they could trace him. And that's exactly what the police were trying to do. They were trying to trace the phone call, but because he only stayed on like a minute or two, they couldn't. He even called in June 1980 the local news station and said that he had killed her and why he had killed her. He had found her with another man, and basically she'd betrayed him, which made no sense to the family because there was no other man. They think maybe he saw her at the parking lot that day with Conrad and just assumed that was like her lover or something, and decided then and there he was going to abduct her like he'd been planning. Police do believe this was the killer who had called in because he gave specific information that had not been released to the public, such as Dorothy having changed out of her black scarf into a red one, and just other little things that only the killer would have known. So yeah, at this point, police and the family were pretty much on board of the theory that she'd been abducted by her stalker. Okay, so some time goes by, and like I said, the family still have getting these creepy phone calls, horrific phone calls going into detail about, their daughter's murder, and then sometimes it would be, "Oh, your daughter's alive, I'm just torturing her." It's just horrible things. But the interesting thing about that is this caller would never call when he knew the father would be home. And so I'm guessing he was still watching them because he never called if the father was home. One time he accidentally did. I guess it was like a weird coincidence where he wasn't supposed to be home that day, but he was. And the minute he heard that it was the father on the other line, he didn't say anything and just hung up. So this led the family and the police to suspect that whoever this stalker is, he probably knew the father, and the father probably knew him, and he knew that if the father had heard his voice, he would have been able to identify him. And after that incident, the stalker didn't call for a couple weeks. I think it really spooked him. So fast forward 4 years later, Dorothy's body is finally found and it's confirmed that she's dead. On August 6, 1984, a construction worker discovered dog and human bones side by side about 30 feet from Santa Ana Canyon Road. Basically, from what I read, Dorothy's body was buried underneath the dog's body. The bones were partly charred, and authorities believe they'd been there for at least 2 years. And when they looked at it, the watch that Dorothy had been wearing was stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th. So that's about an hour after she was abducted from the parking lot. So this led police to believe she was pretty much probably murdered soon after she left that parking lot. The autopsy was performed and they could not figure out any cause of death. On August 14th, the bones were identified as Scott's by dental records, and like I said, the autopsy, there was no determination of death. They couldn't figure it out, and so a memorial service was held on August 22nd, and Dorothy was finally laid to rest and at peace. Her family still didn't have answers though, and just a lot more questions. What happened to their daughter? Who killed her? And also, interesting fact, I find it really interesting that the killer buried her underneath a dog. That tells me that this person probably is someone who's killed before and has experience, and probably not stupid. They knew that that would definitely throw off, if someone was looking for the body, that would throw them off, the dog, because they would smell that, and when they dug it up, they would see it's a dead dog and just think, oh, that's what the dog was smelling. So I definitely think they knew what they were doing with that, and they probably didn't think she was ever going to be found. It was just a coincidence that she was found. So as far as leads, there's not really any leads. They don't know who. They still have, to this day, they were never able to track the caller, like I said, because he would not talk long on the phone long enough for them to track him. They don't really, like everyone who knew Dorothy said that they could not think of anyone that would hate her so much that they would do this to her. Like, she literally had no enemies. She really didn't have a life. Like, her family said she went to work and came home. That was it. So this whole stalking incident was just crazy to them because they were like, who would hate our daughter so much that they would do this to her? Police and the family feel that the only scenario is it's someone who probably knew her from work or came in contact with her through work. 'Cause that's the only place that they would have been able to, unless it was someone who just saw her and became obsessed. The reason they believe this though is because Dorothy was adamant that she recognized the voice. So I personally feel, and the people who have investigated this case feel that it was probably someone who she maybe came in contact with that maybe delivered the packages or was a customer, someone who maybe worked there, someone who she probably didn't see on a daily basis but saw enough or spoke to enough that she would have recognized the voice. I don't know if this case can ever be solved. I hope so. I definitely hope so. I think it's all gonna, if they want to solve this case, they just need to continue looking into her place of work. That's pretty obvious. That's probably where the stalker originated from. I think whoever the stalker was really sadistic, especially considering he stalked the family for 4 years, by harassing them with these phone calls. That's pretty intense, even for this. So hopefully there can be some peace for her family. I mean, I can't even imagine all these years not knowing who killed your daughter and knowing that her last hour on earth was spent in horror. But I'm happy that they found her body and she was able to be laid to rest. Hopefully this case, getting more attention. I don't know, maybe if someone's watching this that knew Dorothy or worked at that shop during that time period, if you can remember anything, contact the police. Every little bit helps. The sad part is Sean is without a mother, and that's a real shame, because she really loved her son, it sounds like, and he was her world. He was her world. So, all right, well, that's it for today. I'm gonna drop a picture of her below in the little description box. Yeah, just a sad case. It's one of those cases that sticks with you, and I think definitely we've come a long way since 1980s in the ways that we handle stalking and the way we protect victims, but we still have a long way to go because you still see a lot of cases of stalking victims that end up murdered. Sadly for Dorothy, they've never found her stalker or her murderer. Okay, well, that's it for today.